Welcome back to part 2 of my conversation with Matthew Szydagis. Matt, you gave one presentation in 2 parts at the SU conference this year. Part 1 of this conversation was about one of those parts. It was about materials analysis on the arts part that you've looked at. The second part of your presentation, though, was about something very different. It was about the question of how long until we can pretty confidently say catastrophic disclosure will happen. You looked at that question largely in terms of by framing it in terms of how long it'll be until we have like rock solid photographic evidence of UAP.
No, not of UAP in general, but of a crashed craft.
Like crashed craft, yes. So not just UAP, but UAP that have crashed. And so you did this by looking at a few things. One is like the proliferation of cell phone cameras, and the other is the rate at which we've sort of historically reported crashed UAP. Tell us about how that question assembled itself in your mind, why those methods, and we can go from there.
So my mainstream job is to look for dark matter, which is something we haven't seen, but we can set statistical limits on it. And I was thinking, can we do the same thing with other types of exotic events or phenomena? And, David Grush had come out, and I wanted to see, is it statistically possible that the crash rate could be as high as he claims when everybody's got a phone? Because, Mick West and famous debunkers are always saying, if UFOs exist, if Bigfoot exists, where's, the iPhone footage? Although, one could say we've got plenty of footage of, UAP, and no, but that does not seem to convince anyone. And yet, but that's why I focused on a much more specific question in my paper of an actual vehicle from a non-human intelligence actually crashing and being caught on camera, uploaded to YouTube, Vimeo, TikTok, etc. So that was really my focus. And so, as you said, my SCU talk had 2 parts, but really the first part was on this. So we're actually talking about part 1 now. And in part 1, we were talking about part 2, and part 2 was about the art part, which also has the word part in it. So it's very confusing. So actually, they're not entirely unrelated. I tried to make them a natural flow from one topic to the other, because I said, speaking of crashes, and then part 2 was on the material analysis. So I did desperately try to connect them to try to make for a seamless talk. It might not have worked, but I tried to make it seamless for the 30-minute talk. But you're right, they are different topics. But I was really proud of the statistical analysis I did, because I think the same thing can be used to determine the number of Bigfoot per square mile or whatever. All these kinds of questions, they can be answered simply by looking how many phones are there, what's the population, what's population density, and we can answer these questions at least order magnitude, at least do an estimate of.
So what you started with David Grush's comment on how often we have crashed UAP. Is that just the foundation starting point? And what does he estimate?
I believe it was something like, and not just estimate, he claims to have, at least secondhand, not firsthand knowledge. I think it was in the ballpark of 10 per century. And in like North America or globally? I believe globally, because that includes like the supposed 1933, I think, Italian case. So no, I think he was talking about globally. And again, people watch this video will be like, oh no, it's 12 or it's 15. And people who will say that don't understand what it means to estimate, and don't understand what order of magnitude is. So 15 is the same as 10, 12 is the same as 10. I'm doing an order of magnitude estimation.
So by order of magnitude, we mean 1 or 10 or 100?
Or 10, exactly. Right, yeah. Well, it's definitely not 1,000. So one of the things I showed in the paper is definitely not 1 per year. So that you can rule out. If there was 1 crash per year, and remember, even taking into account most of the world is ocean, even taking into account low population density areas, if you had 1 per year, I show in the paper, we would have had, someone would have caught one on their iPhone already. Like that.
Let's game that out. That's a good.
That's not happening. It's not 1 per year, 100 per century. That no way.
Let's imagine what that would be like if we had 1 per year.
Yeah.
And they were crashing randomly across the Earth. And let's just say the Earth is 70% water. That's 7 out of 10, years, you'd have a crash, but it would just go into the water and nobody would see it. But 3 out of 10 years, you'd have something that crashed on land. Now, where do you go from calculating that? Now, lots of land is not very inhabited. It could just sit there for a while and rot away or get like swept up by the government. But lots of areas of the surface of the Earth are like highly populated. So what's the distribution there? And how many of those 3 out of 10 years would you have one that crashed in an area that would get?
It's all in my paper. I took all of that into account. And so basically, because of the fact you don't have people everywhere and you don't have land everywhere, it wouldn't necessarily be, instantaneous, but it should have already happened because it's 2025 and we've had camera phones since before 2008. Well, 2008's first iPhone, but it wasn't the first camera phone, right? We have camera phones already. We have people with cameras. And so I already gamed all this out with a Monte Carlo computer simulation. And I showed there's no way we could pull up my graphs, but we just go, we're not going to do that. People should watch my talk on Hoover or later on YouTube, but I gamed it all out. Or they can read my paper. They can just download and read my paper, open access for free. It's not like it's hard to find. My last name is unique. There's
we'll have a link to the Hoover where you can see this presentation, and we'll have a link to the paper. Perfect. And people can just read the open access version, including it's published in Limina. That's Mike Siffone's journal at Society of UAP Studies, and it's published there. And there's also a second also open access version on the archive, right? ARXIV. And so there's plenty, people can read my paper. And I know nobody's reading my papers or Kevin's because I mentioned this at the SU conference. I have all kinds of bombshells in there that nobody asks me about, nobody emails me about, which to me is proof positive. Nobody's actually reading it from cover to cover, line by line, because they would notice, holy cow, you said this on this line. But yeah, in my paper, I showed that if it's one per year, we would have already seen them 5-10 years ago. And so it's not immediate, people invented camera phones because they take time to spread. And like you said, the Earth is not all populated, blah, blah, blah. But I take all of that into account and I show that, if it's 100 per century, if it's 1 per year, that's very improbable to be the correct crash rate. I mean, one could say, this was a criticism I faced at SU. Oh, they don't crash randomly, but only at military sites. Fine. And I said this at the SU conference. If you disagree with my paper and its conclusions, write your own paper. And I made a prediction at the SU conference. Nobody will. Because nobody wants to build on other people's work, which I think is one of the reasons why UAP studies is still fringe and not mainstream, is because people write papers in a vacuum and they don't cite other people's work. Evan's done this. He has over 500 references in his giant paper in Progress Aerospace. And that's the right thing to do because you want to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Build on the work of other people. And I would be thrilled if somebody took my idea, wrote a second paper on it and said, oh, Szydagis got this, this, and that wrong, and here are some improvements. And like I said, my prediction is nobody will do it. If somebody does do it, it won't count. Here's what I mean by that. I don't think a Ph.D. scientist will do it. I have no doubt some UFO enthusiast might look at my paper and put some PDF out there that they don't publish in a mainstream peer-reviewed scientific journal. That could happen. But I'm saying that my prediction is by the end of this year, my paper will have 0 citations still, and it will have 0 people who've taken it and built upon it. So it's very easy to criticize. You didn't take into account X, Y, or Z. Very easy to criticize. Very hard to sit down and do the work yourself, right? I wrote my own code. I wrote the whole paper by myself. I made plots. So for my, catastrophic disclosure paper, and it's very hard, very easy to criticize, very, very hard to do your own work. So I would love for somebody to take that into account. Oh, they're non-random. They're only on military sites, nuclear sites, or this and that. Perfect. Do it. Do the math. I even actually give people all my equations. I give them my code. You can download my code, my C++ code for free with my paper, and you can change the assumptions, number of witnesses, how far they are from the crash, and you can see how it changes things. So what are the assumptions that you did build into this?
So there are only a few assumptions that I didn't change. Most assumptions were flexible, so I could see how the conclusions were changed by the assumptions. So the baked-in assumptions were NHI are real. They crash sometimes because they're fallible. That basically those are that's the baked-in assumptions. There's some form of NHI. I don't care if it's ET or something else. And hell, it doesn't even have to be NHI. it could be a breakaway civilization that we don't know about. So it could still be human, or humans from the future or whatever. That doesn't count as NHI. So I made as few assumptions as possible. And then I modified. I had a set of quantitative assumptions that I modified. How is the population going to grow over the next century? How is the proliferation of smartphones with cameras going to continue? And I made different assumptions. I made optimistic, pessimistic, middle of the road for those. And then I also had a third assumption on how close you have to be to get a good photo or video. And then the final assumption was, what's the crash rate? And so all of those were variables. All those assumptions were variables. And then what I found is that if I pick the middle of the road of the assumptions, I get that if crashes are real at a rate of, as Grush has claimed, and if they're random, not just in military sites, then basically it's going to be like 10, 20 years and we should have something. And so then what happens when 30 years go by, 40 years go by, 50 years go by? We can start to rule out the higher crash rates. Mm-hmm. Or, again, if you want to be pedantic, you could say, oh, no, it is that high of a crash rate, but miraculously, it's always in the middle of nowhere by a military base, and the military get it right away and no civilian will ever see it. So you could claim that, but even that you can't claim forever, because eventually, you're going to have a leak from a security camera footage of a military base, somebody who doesn't care about NDAs or anything, then you just push it out further in the future. But yeah, so I think I hope that answers your question about my assumptions that went in.
Oh yeah, that does answer it. Yeah, because you don't have a lot of hard assumptions. What you do is you stipulate a bunch of variables, and then you say here are the ranges for those variables, and if you assign those ranges, at some point, whatever value you assign to them, it sort of converges on like 100%.
Well, it always converges to 100%. Always, because think of it this way. This is kind of sobering, because you can think about this for nuclear war and other things. Anything that has a chance of happening, like a per day chance or per year chance, will eventually happen.
Sure.
Right? And so like
the dice, it will land.
Exactly. So, and I'm not saying here, this is not the gambler's fallacy. It's not like, oh, you're due for a win. It doesn't quite work that way, because again, it's on average. So that's not what I'm claiming, but I'm saying that over time, if you all the probabilities asymptote to 100%. And again, you can't take this to a casino, because it could end up that by the time, your losing streak ends, you're already out of money. So I'm absolutely not spouting the gambler's fallacy here, right? That's not what I'm saying here, because there's other things that can happen. Because what if NHI, they do exist, but they stop visiting Earth or something? You know what I mean? Like, there are things that would make it not 100%. But given the assumptions I put in, no matter how I change the numerical variables that we just mentioned, it always asymptotes to 100%.
Because the probability is not zero, right? There's some probability that a crashed UAP will get caught on camera. You roll that dice long enough, and
exactly.
We're just asking how long it's going to take.
Exactly. Now, to be clear, do I trust 100% result when it says it's going to happen by the year 2500? No, we have to take it with a grain of salt. Right? Because what if, human population crashes because we have a war or an epidemic, and suddenly there's only like 500,000 humans on it. You know what I mean? So I do have to be careful that this 100% is contingent upon the population growth and smartphone growth assumptions that I make. I vary the assumptions, but I didn't take extreme assumptions like smartphones cease to exist. Of course, it's going to go down back to 0%. You know what I mean?
But the crash rate changes radically.
Or the crash rate changes radically. Exactly. What if it's time dependent? They stop coming here. Those are kinds of things that are impossible to take into account, because any assumption we make, we're just pulling it out of our butts. So I try to restrict myself from pulling assumptions out of my butt. I only I would only stick to assumptions where I could point to something like, look, this is how many smartphones there are. Look, here's a United Nations study projecting how world population is going to grow over the next century. So I try, and for the crash rate, I point to Grush. I point to other people who've written books. Kevin Randall has a book on this. He's a ufologist. So basically, I point to people. I point to sources. I'm not going to make up something where there's no way to know if I'm right or wrong. Oh, the crash rate is a function of time. How the hell would I know that? And so I stayed away from assumptions that it would literally, you just be making it up, and there's no possible source for that assumption.
So this is all a hypothetical calculation. You're not claiming Grush's estimate of how
I'm not.
Are right.
what I'm claiming is that if we multiply his claim by a factor of 10, that's unreasonable. And there are books out there, and I cite them, that claim, there have been 300 crashes the past 100 years. Bullshit. Okay, because if the crash rate was that high, someone would have caught it on their iPhone or Samsung or Android. Or, I don't even take into account ordinary cameras, right? What about ordinary cameras people have been taking pictures of stuff with for decades, right? Just an old-fashioned analog camera. Run into the, right? UFO appears, run into the house, get your camera. That has happened. That has definitely happened. I'm only counting smartphones. And so if you count regular phones too, good Lord. And so if we take Grush's rate, multiply it by 10, that's ruled out. Whereas the order of magnitude of Grush's claim is on the borderline. It's on the borderline where if Grush is right, then, and it's random, to be clear, remember random, I'm not assuming it's near military sites, but it's literally random over land or water. And I basically, if Grush's claim of roughly 10 per century on land, and so it's really 30, but 10 on land per century, and it's if it's correct, we're on the cusp right now. And basically it means that in 10 or 20 years, if he's telling the truth, or remember, he's relaying secondhand. I think he's honest and sincere, but he may have been lied to. What he's been told secondhand, if it's true, then we're 10 or 20 years away from a form of catastrophic disclosure, although that term has a lot of different definitions. The way I defined it in the paper so that there would be no confusion is I defined it as disclosure that is not controlled by the military industrial complex or the government, where its private citizens have caught something, some damning evidence themselves. So to be clear, that is not an agreed upon definition. And so it's that phrase might mean different things to different people. And so for extra clarity, I literally took a paragraph at the bottom of page 1 of the paper to make absolutely clear what I was talking about, because I wasn't talking about catastrophic in the sense of panic, because that's another way of defining
not catastrophic consequences, but unmanaged.
Unmanaged, exactly, which is not necessarily panic in the streets. People might not care. They might say, oh, it's AI, it's Photoshop. They wouldn't even believe the evidence. And so I was very clear on page 1 that I wasn't using it that way. I wasn't using it the way that some others do, but I was very clear about that on the first page. So I've gotten some criticism about this, but I said, look, it's a cool phrase. It was used at the Soul Foundation conference, I thought, in a similar way to the way I'm using it. I was very clear in how I defined it. And I was saying that it's grassroots. Maybe a better term I could have used is grassroots disclosure versus, top down.
So I don't actually think that's a criticism. It's just a function of the fact that the terms in this space have not yet gotten well,
they're constantly being redefined. And in fact, there's constantly a lot of, I don't think there's ill will behind it at all, but there's constantly a change in the denotation versus the connotation of terms. And UFO is a classic example of that. Ask anybody what a UFO is, and everyone will say it's an alien spaceship. Probably 90% of people, I bet if you did a study, it would be like UFO equals alien spaceship. No, it's not.
And it has a shape to it. It
has a shape, flying saucer, right? Exactly. But the U just means unidentified. And somehow we jump from we can't identify to it must be an NHI craft. That's a big leap. And so I feel like the terms are so ill-defined because we don't even follow what the terms mean to begin with, because everyone just says UFO is alien spaceship. I get this all the time on my TV show. I'm on The Proof Is Out There, and they ask me, oh, is this a UFO? I'm like, yes. And they're like, oh my God, you agreed it's an alien spaceship? I'm like, no, I agree. I can't identify it right now.
It is.
Or I can't identify exactly. It could still be a bird or plane. I just haven't identified it yet. Everything is a UFO until you identify it. Then it's an IFO, right?
Yeah, they're really opposite conclusions. It's like if you agree it's a UFO and they're like, oh, you said it's an alien spaceship. No, I'm saying precisely that I don't know.
Exactly. I'm saying I don't know what it is. We tried to do that with UAP, and I've seen it happen. It's already been co-opted. As soon as you show UAP, people talk about crashed UAP, for my paper. And I'm like, I thought UAP meant we were trying to get away from the fact that we're talking about flying saucers. And so even now UAP is become synonymous with alien spaceship. So it's too late. This whole term's been co-opted. Now, to be clear, I'm open to that hypothesis. That's why I wrote the paper. But it drives me nuts when every single, ball lightning or earthquake light is a UFO and therefore an alien spaceship. That really, really gets under my skin, because that just provides ammunition for debunkers, for the uber skeptics to say, look, it's all nonsense. And when actually I think there's a difference between being open-minded like I am and automatically assuming every UFO is an NHI craft. I think that we have to separate those two things.
No, yeah. Those are two bad paths. One, the assumption that it's all extraterrestrial or NHI craft means that you would never discover any interesting natural anomalies. You'd always just collapse them into this theory that's wrong. And then saying that, well, like, oh, don't study anything that's a UAP or whatever really effectively means don't study anything we don't already understand. Just ignore it and assume that it's hoax.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Those is the way that we want to go.
Exactly.
So you came up with, I think there is one interesting substantive conclusion that we can draw on your paper that's not just probabilistic. It's that, first of all, we can be pretty sure that David Grush himself did not go through the sort of analysis that you did in this paper, because almost nobody is capable of doing this or has the time or resources to
well, actually, tons of people, it's trivial. It's high school math. And so actually lots of people should have done what I did. And it's kind of crazy that nobody's had, not even the skeptics, because, or the big debunkers. It's pretty trivial what I did, actually. It's nothing special.
Not by creating the models and things. Like you wrote some plus code and like found.
Yeah, that took me 1 day. That took me 1 day to write, and it took me 1 week to write the paper. Like anyone could have done this. So don't give me too much credit is what I'm saying. What I did was trivially easy, and anyone could have done it. And it's a complete shock to me that nobody even, any ufologist, even without a PhD or something, hasn't sat down and tried this. It's literally high school math that I'm doing. It's extremely simple.
But you also got information, like you pulled in information from David Grush's testimony, and you looked.
I did, but that was stuff I was absorbing already from the zeitgeist anyway.
Yeah, but most people don't have that. So that's kind of what I mean when I say resources. Like most people don't have both the access to like the prosaic data about cell phone proliferation and knowledge about this space.
I don't have access to it either. I Googled it. It took me 1 minute on Google to find out how many smartphones there are in the world. It took me 2 minutes on Google to find the world population density. This is not something I had magical resources for. Could anybody have done it? No. But I would say several hundred, if not several thousand people exist in this country alone who could have done the paper the same way or even better or faster than me. It's very easy math that I do. I don't think I even use calculus. I think it's just high school algebra.
And let's rephrase it this way.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that David Grush did not happen to sit down and do all these calculations either.
Oh, yeah.
Figure out what a plausible crash rate is. So it is interesting that when you run the numbers, David Grush's estimate of the crash rate doesn't land in an area that's like implausible. It doesn't put us in a place where it's that can't be true.
No,
it would have already happened by now.
No, not at all. Not at all. What's very interesting is one of my conclusions was that it puts us kind of like at the knife edge, where basically there's a reasonable probability that if his rate is right, we should have seen something by now, but it's not that high. Like I said, the middle, like I think I quantified it as the 50% probability point or something around there, is like 2040, 2050. And so it's very reasonable. And I see the point you're saying. It's very improbable. You'd really have to be conspiracy theorists to claim that Grush is lying and he made that up just to put it at the edge of my paper. My paper didn't exist, right, when he came out. And so I can't verify this, but supposedly a friend of mine forwarded one of the first drafts of my paper to him. I can't confirm that. But if so, that's cool. Like I said, I want to believe him. But the problem is it's not about belief, it's about knowing. And so I wrote the paper because I'm like, look, I want to see, is his claim plausible? And it turns out it is plausible. But to be clear, the more decades that go by with nothing happening, that with nobody catching, the crash saucer with the gray half dead falling out on their phone, the more decades that pass by, it's the same thing with Bigfoot. The more decades without a conclusive, here's Bigfoot smiling into my camera on my iPhone. The more decades that go by, it really makes it harder to claim that these things exist and are happening. It really makes it more, it suggests that some of the debunkers might be right. So the more time that goes by, then it's not proof. It's evidence versus proof. Right? It's not conclusive because, again, I was assuming random location. What if that's wrong? But if my assumptions are correct and more decades go by, it's just going to suggest that there is no such thing as crashes of craft. It's going to be very hard to make that claim.
Doesn't David Grush say that some number of the things that we're calling now craft are actually donations from NHI, that they're not actually catastrophic crashes?
Yeah. Yes, I've heard that claim. Diana Pasulka's also made it. I don't buy it. Are we going to go crash some of our F-35s or whatever into China on purpose? Here, China, here have some of our planes. It just strikes me as very odd.
But is he saying? I thought that he was saying that they're not actually crashed in in a way that damages them. But
I hear what you mean. They just literally land. Yeah, exactly. But then where are the biologics? He said himself, that's his word. The biologics. Show me the bodies. Are they alive then? Do we kill them? Like on the X-Files, there's this imaginary in the TV show, the X-Files. Right? There's a law that if aliens survive, you got to execute them, right? So
you have to. It's like obligated.
You didn't watch that on the X? So in the X-Files, it was a law, and the smoking man was enforcing it. Is that basically that no country was permitted to have a living extraterrestrial biological entity, EBE, which is highly unethical, right? Welcome to Earth.
Yeah.
Blam. And so, again, that begs the question: if they're just landing, where are they? Where are the grays? Why don't they just come out and say? So again, I'm not poo-pooing Grush's claims, because it's like Fox Mulder says, I want to believe. But right now we're at the level of trust me, bro, right? Because we don't have any physical evidence. In the other episode, I talked about how there might be a prosaic explanation for the one piece of physical evidence I was looking at. So right now there is no damning physical evidence. Nobody's brought an alien arm that they cut off the body in the freezer and smuggled off the military base. I just want to see evidence, and I'm sincere in that. When I say I want to see evidence, I'm not sneering like Mick West, others. I'm not saying, oh, show me the evidence. There's no evidence. I'm sincere. If there's evidence, bring it to me. And let's not get into the mummies and all that and how it's probably a hoax. I don't want to get in there. but I want good physical evidence that multiple scientists independently agree on. And actually, in the conclusion of my catastrophic disclosure paper, I point out one of the major flaws in my analysis. I'm very humble about it. I say, look, this could all be nonsense, because you could have this amazing video and no one's going to believe. They'll say it's AI. They'll say it's Photoshop. It's a fake photo, fake video. Doesn't matter if the shadows are correct, because AI is getting better every day and things like that. But then, so that in the conclusion of my paper, I say, it would be even better if someone grabs some physical evidence from the crash, just grab a piece of the ship. Or if there's a dead alien, put it in your freezer or something. Just grab it before the government can come and steal it, using eminent domain or whatever legal recourse, or national security. And so I conclude the paper saying, look, you have to take my paper with a grain of salt, because if the photos and videos might not be sufficient. They haven't been yet, right? In 8 decades or more. And so I'm very humble at the conclusion, and I say, look, my paper is contingent on this photo or video being so freaking amazing that there's no way it's AI. We've checked it. We know it's not Photoshop or artificial, and we know it's not Midjourney, or DALL-E. It's real. And so that's obviously a huge assumption, but I'm very honest about that when I'm discussing the conclusions on the last page.
You are, absolutely. Yeah. I mean this question seriously, as silly as it sounds. What would you do if a person showed up to you in your office and said, I grabbed a crashed piece of a UFO before the government could get to it, and here it is? I mean, that's sort of what you're advocating, how it would play out. Right?
I would immediately do 2 things. Number one, depending on its size, even though this is bad, right? You don't want to damage something, right? You want to treat it with respect, right? Because it could be so important. I would immediately attempt to break it in 2. Here's the reason why. Because what if it's real? And what if the government's going to come and steal it, right? What if it's true? What if all the conspiracy is true? So step 1 is I'd immediately try to break off a piece, maybe not equally in 2, so that this individual could still have some and I could begin testing. That's first step. Second step, I would drop what I'm doing and I'd test it immediately. Except no, here's the thing. I wouldn't quite do that, because here's the thing. I open myself up to hoaxes and random people showing up now in my office because it can be found. So I have to be very careful. The problem is that I've already tested pieces that people have kind of done that to me with, not literally showing up in my office, but they've shipped me parts and they've turned out to be airplanes, meteors. So I wouldn't literally drop everything, but I would definitely give it a fair chance and test it like I've done with other things. But if really, it also, I have to be cautious not to jump to conclusions, because someone could be mentally ill or hoaxing just to waste my time. And so would be better if it was like biological evidence, right? It's like, here's an alien arm. But if it's just a piece of metal, I have to be still very, very skeptical and cautious. And like, I don't want to, when people now listen to this video, I don't want to open myself up to random strangers, because this has happened to me before, and to Kevin Knuth. I don't want a random UFO crackpot who has a piece of a crashed, airplane, right? Human airplane coming and telling you, oh, it's an NHI crash and you got to test it before the government gets it. Because then what's going to happen is I'm going to constantly waste my time. As a professor, my time is very precious. As you know, I tell people I work 300% time, like 100-hour weeks. That's not an exaggeration.
No, I believe it.
That's the truth. And people don't realize how busy professors are, but like, it's true. It's the absolute honest to God truth. And anytime anybody wanted me to prove it to them, I would give them a breakdown of my schedule and say, this took 2 hours, this took 1 hour. I prove to them that I work 80, 90, 100-hour weeks. I prove it to them. But people believe me, fortunately. But basically, I have to be cautious about that. But that's a very good question. I don't think your question was silly at all. But again, I have to be careful. How do I know that person's not mentally ill or is hoaxing me on purpose to purposely waste my time to make fun of me later than to go on Twitter and be like, oh, ha, I fooled this university professor with a piece of trash I found in my backyard. So I have to be very cautious. And so I would have to judge. And I'm not a psychologist. I'd have to judge how trustworthy the individual is and how much additional evidence can they provide. Like, do they have a video of it crashing and showing, look, and here's me, holding my phone, picking up a piece. Like, how much more can they corroborate more than just here I am with a piece? Because here I am with a piece is not sufficient. I would need a little bit more. Yeah.
So I think the point I was trying to drive at, and I knew that you would land on, is that people in the skeptic community or debunker community have this idea that, like, well, if it was crashing all the time, we would have, like, gotten a piece of it and just it would be proven. We would have gotten a photo of it. But even if you imagine the scenarios where that happens, there are a lot of hurdles to getting from, like, having really good evidence in your hand to proving to the entire scientific community that
it's a massive hurdle. Exactly. So that's a very disingenuous criticism from debunkers. And in fact, my paper, frankly, proves they're full of shit. Because remember, if Grush's rate is correct, I predict that the 50% point for having seen something, and that's only the 50% point on the curve, is somewhere around 20, 30, 40, 50, right? That's like right on the first page also in my abstract, around 2040, because it, again, depends on my assumptions exactly. So I think I called it 2040 plus or minus, 5, 10 years, 15, something like that. So there's very good reason why it hasn't happened yet, because I calculated this. I actually sat down and did the math. Because the Earth is mostly water, because we got places like Antarctica and Greenland, it's very reasonable that there hasn't been any physical evidence yet. And so basically, you could turn around my conclusion and show that my conclusion is like consistent with the possibility you might have an average of one crash per decade with no evidence. And that's completely legit. And it's because, again, the Earth is pretty huge. I mean, people don't realize how big the surface area of the Earth is. I take all this into account in my study. And yet, so I'll be honest with you, my conclusion shocked me. I had to make sure I made no mistake in the math. And remember, my paper has been peer reviewed. That doesn't guarantee it's perfect. To be clear, there are all kinds of wrong science papers that are peer reviewed. I'm not claiming it's perfect. However, it increases the chances it's correct. It's been peer reviewed by other scientists. Mike Safone, the director, an editor, I know he did a great job. He found anonymous reviewers who read the paper and critiqued it very seriously. And that improved it. That improved the quality. But the point is that I was trying to make, actually, now I got off topic. What was the point I was trying to make?
You're saying that you were surprised by the conclusion.
Oh, yes. I was surprised. I was worried that my paper was going to be complete nonsense, where the conclusion was it's going to take 10,000 years because of how big the Earth is and stuff. And like, I didn't realize how prevalent humans are on Earth. Yes, the Earth is big. And yes, there's like vast stretches of the plains in the United States are unpopulated. Yeah. Or Antarctica, Greenland, places like that. I was shocked that there are sufficient humans now on Earth at a sufficient density with enough phones to be able to actually, and that includes, places with no phones, developing nations where barely anyone has a phone. I did my best to take this all into account, at least on average, and I tried my best. And so basically I was shocked that I got something like 2040 when I thought I would get nonsense. I would get like, it's going to take 1,000 years. And so I was shocked that even at that I thought even at Grush's claimed rate, approximate rate of 10 per century, 10 crashes per century, I thought it was going to take millennia. And so I was shocked. And basically that just goes to show that you can't just be an armchair debunker. You got to sit down and do the math. And to his credit, Mick West often does sit down and do that.
Yeah, he does.
To his credit, he does very often. But most debunkers don't. They just say, oh, it's a seagull, it's a this, without actually checking. And so basically what I decided is like, I'm sick and tired of people just saying we would have had evidence by now. That was another one of the inspirations of my paper. And my conclusion is no. I call bullshit on that. It's entirely possible. The reason we don't have evidence yet is because the crashes are too rare. And so basically what I'm saying is that that you could say the majority of crash claims are hoaxes or misidentifications, but it still allows for up to 10-ish per century. And that's still consistent with the facts.
You know what it makes me think of is the history of meteorites and their recognition in science. I mean, there was a really long period of time after the 1700s when we have something like formal science, but when almost everybody who was a scientist would have said rocks just do not fall from the sky. And rocks were falling from the sky like pretty regularly, but it's like there's some rate at which rocks fall from the sky at which some point in the future one's going to fall in an undeniable way and
it did.
Have proof.
It did.
They like hit a person. They have like meteorites that have struck people.
Well, it happened. Well, I don't know if it struck people, but I think a house.
Yeah, there was like
a rock, and so I believe it was France, 1800s. So we finally figured it out. They're like, holy shit, rocks do fall from the sky. Yep. And that was really hard because nobody had smartphones in the 18, 17, 1600s and in antiquity, and that made it extra hard because how do you know it fall from the sky, right? You just have the crater and the rock. But how do you know that wasn't, somebody lobbed it with a trebuchet, right? You don't know because there's no video of it falling from the sky. All you have is eyewitnesses, and you can say, oh, the witnesses are hysterical. They're making it up. And that's the problem we have with UFOs and UAP. It's meteorites all over again. But the good news is we've got camera phones now. And so that's why I think I'm a little more optimistic since we do have the tools now, hopefully, to be better about this.
So you're steering towards the question that I asked you in the Q&A section of this paper, and maybe we can end with this. The way I framed it in the conference was that you talk about catastrophic disclosure, and the way we normally talk about disclosure is not just like rock solid evidence, but like rock solid evidence that everybody believes. And that's part of the problem with meteorites is that there was evidence. I mean, it was happening, but you had to hit a point where like the evidence was good enough that it like tipped the scales of belief of a certain community. And that's part of what you're trying to calculate here too. Like at what point do we get not just evidence, but evidence that's good enough? But one thing that complicates that is the fact that like the threshold for what people will believe is like fluctuates and changes over time, like especially if we're talking about video evidence or something, and you introduce generative AI and that changes how people think about visual evidence or whatever. And so how does that fit? I know your answer to this because I asked the question, I heard you answer, but I want everybody else to hear it too. How does that question of like shifting levels of credulity figure into this larger project?
So I don't remember this is how I answered you in Alabama, but I would say there's a twofold answer that's come to me right now, which is, first of all, this is exactly why I focused on physical crashes, and in order to try to make it above the threshold.
As opposed to just UAP in the sky.
UAP in the sky, because we've already had that for decades, hasn't gotten past the threshold. That's step one. And then the other way I tackle it is then at the end of the paper, I do mention like, okay, photo, video still might be good enough. Grab a piece of physical evidence. So those are the ways I try to tackle that, because there's no way to tackle that numerically because you can't predict human behavior, right? That's not going to happen. Okay, so I know economists try to do it. It's just like, humans are not rational actors, all right? So it's very hard to, and especially, like you said, the threshold is going to get higher also because we've got so much misinformation online, disinformation. People believe lies constantly on social media, and sometimes it causes them to die, right? If there's a pandemic, you don't believe it's real, and we had this, right, a few years ago, and it'll kill you. And so basically, but we have now such a high threshold that I didn't want to even go there. I'm not claiming that your question's not an important one. I'm just saying that there's no way to conclusively answer that. And so the best I could do was to narrow my scope to evidence of a physical crash, not just general UAP, because we have thousands of videos. And so like I wanted to narrow it in order to try to sidestep a very important question, but try to sidestep the question of threshold of credulity, because that's nearly impossible to model mathematically. And so I just wanted to try to talk about evidence that's so solid that threshold is that a reasonable person could assume that that threshold is crossable in the near future.
Did you think about modeling how long we would have to wait until not only there's a UAP crash, but assuming that UAP crashes just are kind of random, how long we would have to wait until a UAP crashes in a way that creates like irrefutable structural damage or something? Like it's pretty hard to deny that it happened if somebody caught it on a video and there's like a demolished building left afterward.
No, I hadn't considered that. Because I only considered people population density. But that's a great point. I had never thought of that. But this is just one of the now it's like I think 15 or 20 things I didn't think of. I tried to list most of them at the SCU.
Yeah, you can't model.
Yeah, you can't model everything. But I do encourage other people to take my work and add more to it. That's a really good idea. For that, we need to know the density of structures on Earth. I'm sure somebody knows that in some paper. But as opposed to population density, that's a really great idea. I like that a lot, because imagine you've got a video of like a classic flying saucer shape and it crashes through like a piece of your house and you're videoing it from outside. And people deny the video, but they can show up to your house and there's damage literally corresponding to what you videoed. What the hell, right? So you host it and it's exactly in your fake video. Come on. So that's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that. And I'm sure that helped with meteorites, like you said. I'm sure that probably helped. But yeah, I don't know. But the good thing is somebody could take my code, take my paper, and they could model that. Basically, the way to model that is just instead of doing person density, do density of homes and businesses, skyscrapers. That's a different number, because it's probably going to be very similar to the population density. How many buildings per square kilometer across the globe? There'll be areas that are rural where that number is very low, but I already took that into account population density as well. So I think that it would be not too hard to adapt my paper. And that's a good idea. That'd be really, really hard to explain away, right? And here's the hole where the saucer crashed through my house, right? That's a really good idea.
Or the broken highway or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, because we're not talking about, this isn't like Roswell where it's like a cattle ranch, right? You're saying, what if it's not on a ranch in the middle of nowhere? What if it plows through a house? And really, because human population has been growing, population density, we have more buildings than we did, right? In like 1947, for example. So your point is a very reasonable.
Well, that's further work for somebody to do.
Yeah, I want somebody else to take over after me, because I'm kind of done, because I'm moving on to the physical evidence analysis of alleged crashes.
Well, on the final point here, we have a few links that we can stick into the discussion here, but
yes.
You're doing another project that might be of interest to people. You're teaching a course on sort of ideas of advanced propulsion. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. And so it's being offered through SUOPS, Society for UAP Studies. And I would love for everybody in Society for UAP Studies and everyone in SCU, Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, to take my class. And you could just ask former students how they really, really enjoyed it. And it's not just exotic propulsion, so I cover everything. So in the beginning of class, I talk about rocketry. I talk about the beginning of rockets. And over the course of the class, I go into more exotic things like electromagnetic-based or warp, space-time warp-based propulsion as the class goes onward. It's 8 weeks, once a week for 8 weeks. And we go through we managed to hit up all kinds of topics of advanced and speculative propulsion techniques.
That sounds like a blast. When does it start?
It starts on Wednesday, August 13th, and it goes through October 1st. So it's on Wednesdays. It starts on Wednesday, August 13th, and it's at 2 p.m., 2 to 5 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time.
So you get to sit, you'll have readings that the students are going to do. Then they'll come in, there'll be like lecture and then Q&A. That's kind of the basic setup for the course.
Exactly. So there's no homework because there's not, a quote unquote real class offered through my university. Yeah, you're not getting a grade, but there's reading assignments for homework. And I'm not just lecturing for 3 hours at you. We have a very, very active Q&A. And in fact, I know because I've taught this course once before. I had very active engagement from the students, lots of discussion, and I plan to facilitate that again. So I would leave lots of time. It's not just 3 hours of me droning. I take pauses where I say, are there any questions? And I specifically say, here's a question I want everyone to give me their thoughts on. So I do break it up, and it's not just me lecturing the whole time. So it's also, the course is $125 per person, or SUOPS offers multiple courses. You can do the $50 monthly deal where it allows you to take different courses. There are many courses also offered by the Society for UAP Studies. So there's a couple different payment plans that are possible.
So at $125 is like a 20th the cost of some university courses. You're getting
yeah. I mean, if you want to measure it that way, but so this is not being offered through my university. I'm not taking away from my university time. So this is on my own free time that I'm doing this. Someday I know that Mike, who's the Mike Siffone's director. I know that he wants to eventually, and I would definitely help him with this, turn things into official courses at people's universities. I believe that's one of his end goals, and I would definitely help him with that at my university, University of Albany, to try to get that down the road at some point.
But for the meantime, the SUOPS courses are taught by professors at very good universities. They're exactly the level of education that you would get there for a super reasonable cost. And you get the time with people who already have a vested interest in this topic, which is not something you can get most other places.
No, and Mike, to be clear, he vets everybody. You have to have a Ph.D. or an advanced degree in the field you're trying to talk about. And so you're not going to just have amateur UFO enthusiasts give a quote unquote class. That's not what's happening here. Mike vets these people. And I'm sure you do too, right? You are on the SUOPS board. You're part of the educational plan. I know that people are vetted. You just can't have random person who has no idea what they're talking about teach one of these classes.
They're all real professors. So
exactly.
Awesome opportunity. Matthew, thank you for being here. This was great. Both episodes are fantastic, and I hope that we don't get in too much trouble for talking about the content that you already put out.
Rich is not going to be happy because people have to pay for Hoover, right? He wants people to pay for it. Yeah.
Well, I think this is a good lead into Hoover because you really genuinely did not cover most of the stuff that you give in your presentation. And there are lots of other presentations that you get to see when you sign up for Hoover, which there will be.
Exactly.
The entire conference.
People can say Jay Stratton's talk, and I know that Rich was stamping out people on X from leaking what he talked about, but you could just pay to go watch it on Hoover. And look,
it's like $75 and you get 20 presentations or something.
Look, I know it's cost money, but here's the thing. SCU is a nonprofit, just like a SUOPS is a nonprofit. They need money in order to keep the lights on and to host conferences like this, because there was the in-person component. And the reason why, my course costs money. Look, I need to live. I don't make enough money as a university professor. I make a woefully inadequate money teaching my regular courses at the university. So we're not trying to become rich. And so I really hope that people can find the money to do it properly and pay for the content.
Yep. You're not just buying the content, you're helping continue.
Exactly. You're allowing people like me to keep doing this when I'm not paid to do it. So this is officially right by the federal government. And so your money is not making me rich. It's making me stay afloat. I have 4 kids and a mortgage. And for Rich, it's helping SCU stay afloat. I don't see money from the Hoover, but that helps Rich and SCU stay afloat. So I do hope people pay and don't just try to try to steal the talks from. I don't think
they will. Our listeners enjoy the content and support this mission. So please follow the link down in the episode description here, and you can sign up for the course that Matt is teaching, or you can go and also get access to the entire SU 2025 conference and see all the presentations that it contains. Matt, thank you.
And Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. It's not too late to do it retroactively, right? Even if you miss the conference, you can still pay. Right. And look, if someone is absolutely unable to pay, all the talks, including mine, will be made available on SCU's YouTube channel in a few months. It's going to be a few months because, again, Rich Hoffman must prioritize the paid registrants.
It's like December or something.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're really poor, and I get that, tons of people in that situation, including, in the U.S., Tons of people can't afford that. They live paycheck to paycheck. So just be patient, please. Everything will be out by the end of the year on every talk, including Jay Stratton's, my talk, everyone's talk, SCU. It's going to be up on YouTube by the end of the year. And I know this because Rich does this every year. And like Old Faithful, right? He puts it up in December every year. He puts up the talks from the June conference. So if you really, really, truly can't afford it, please just be patient and wait for the YouTube videos.
Yep. We're not trying to hold it back from anybody, but if you can.
Exactly. We don't believe in NDAs. We're not trying to hold secrets. It's not what it's about. We believe in openness, but we also believe in, making a living wage, so just please, just patience, everyone. Yeah.
All right, Matt, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye.
The Anomalous Review is a project of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. It's hosted and produced by me, Michael Glosson, and edited by Kelly Michelle. Our theme song was written and performed by Telma Crisanti. Communication and PR work is by Preston Dykes. Our advisory team includes Jennifer Roach, Robert Powell, Richard Hoffman, Joshua Pearson, and Larry Hancock. To find out more about SCU, check out explorescu.org.